Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, March the 27th, 2024. Today, the moon moves into Scorpio, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to look at what the moon in Scorpio means. And so I am going to consider a number of horoscopes of people with the moon in Scorpio. And so on the thumbnail, I've got some pictures of people who have or had the moon in this placement. For example, we've got Boris Johnson, former British Prime Minister. We've got notorious murderer Myra Hindley. If you are British, you will no doubt have heard of her. Infamous for the Moors murders in the 1960s, when a number of children were killed by her and her accomplice, or rather she was his accomplice, Ian Brady. Then there is Bomber Harris, the Second World War British Air Marshal, who was responsible for the bombing of German cities. And as Julian Assange has moon in Scorpio. And finally, there is poet Langston Hughes. And so what I want to do is I want to look at people with moon in Scorpio to try to untangle the themes of this placement. It has a bad reputation. The moon does not work very well in Scorpio. But that doesn't mean to say that just because you've got moon in Scorpio, you're going to have a terrible life or you're going to be a horrible person. Myra Hindley is somewhat exceptional. Just because she was involved in killing children doesn't mean to say that that is a general feature of moon in Scorpio. But it kind of depends on the situation, and that is what I will be looking at today. But before I look at the moon in Scorpio, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Wednesday, March the 27th, 2024. Here we have the chart set for New York at noon today. And you can see that the moon at noon in New York on March the 27th is at 3 degrees 30 minutes Scorpio. In fact, at noon, New York time, moon at 3 degrees Scorpio, that is basically the worst place that the moon can be in, because the moon is not just fallen in Scorpio, but its degree of its maximum fall is 3 degrees Scorpio. I say degree of maximum fall, that's a sort of idea from Vedic astrology. Vedic astrology would say that the moon has its maximum fall at 3 degrees Scorpio and its maximum exaltation at 3 degrees Taurus. And as you move towards one degree or the other, all things being equal, the planet, in this case, the moon strengthens or weakens. So I should say that in Vedic astrology, you use the Vedic, the sidereal zodiac. So it is a bit different. The moon goes into Scorpio London time at 9:03 a.m., which is going to be at 5:03 a.m. in New York, or 5:03, which would be 2:03 a.m. in, say, Los Angeles, Seattle, Oregon, Vancouver, British Columbia, also Vancouver, Washington. There are two Vancouvers. There is a Vancouver in Vancouver, and there is a Vancouver in British Columbia, and there's also a Vancouver in Washington State. There may be other Vancouvers. Moon going into Scorpio, it's not great. Oh, I should say, of course, if you are in Australia or New Zealand, then the moon will not go into Scorpio until tonight. But as I was saying, the moon in Scorpio is not great. I mean, moon is exalted in Taurus, Therefore, it is fallen in Scorpio. It's somewhat too brooding. It's too into itself. It can have strange thoughts, strange feelings, and its energies can often be focused in the wrong areas. And it has a certain reputation for being vindictive. I'm certainly not saying that everyone with moon in Scorpio is vindictive, but it remembers things. It can't just, say bygones, let bygones be bygones. No, moon in Scorpio remembers everything, and perhaps is overly suspicious. And matters aren't helped by the fact that during the first half of Scorpio, moon being in Scorpio, that's moon being between 0 Scorpio and 15 Scorpio, the moon is in the Via Combustor. It's in the Scorpio part of a Via Combustor. The Libran part of a Via Combustor is between 15 Libra and 0 Scorpio, and the Scorpio half is the other half. The Scorpio part of a Via Combustor is almost certainly the most difficult part. I said yesterday, talking about moon in Libra, that in the Via Combustor, that things could happen that we weren't expecting. We might have careful plans and they might get disrupted. Same for today, but probably worse, all things being equal. So it's important not to have very careful plans. We have to have some flexibility. That can be difficult. Moon is in Scorpio. Scorpio is a fixed sign. Doesn't like change. Likes things to be completely set in stone almost. Or should I say set in mud for Moon in Scorpio. Set in dried mud. Kind of somewhat ossified. And that's perhaps the problem today. That emotionally, people are going to be strong. People are going to have strong emotions. But those emotions may not reveal themselves, they may fester. And that does mean that we do have to tread a bit carefully, especially if we're dealing with people who are sensitive, who have a track record of being over-emotional. This moon in Scorpio also makes a square to Pluto. So moon in Scorpio square Pluto is just more of the same, really. Strong feelings, and feelings that are not always released in a healthy and constructive way. One can just hold on to one's feelings, hold on really tight onto one's feelings, and yes, let them fester, and in some ways get more powerful. Though maybe Moon square Pluto is about emotional transformation. At its most positive, perhaps, the moon, we can perhaps through our feelings change the world around us. I suppose that's possible. There may also be feelings about parental figures. I suppose in particular the mother. Moon in Scorpio square Pluto could be a controlling mother, memories of a controlling mother. Well, I suppose if you're a mother yourself, then I suppose you might be a controlling mother. So I suppose you might want to consider that possibility, depending on who you are and what your situation is. That's the moon. Oh, it does trine Mars. That is more positive, having moon trine Mars. It is a suggestion that there is a way of expressing ourselves. And I would say that the moon's trine Mars is more important than moon square Pluto. I know that we like to talk about Pluto and its intensity and so on, but Pluto is a recently discovered planet. It was only discovered in 1930. It's very small. Moon square Pluto is not going to affect most of us. It's the moon trine Mars, by contrast, is much clearer more definite energy. And I think it's more important from the moon square Pluto. And moon trine Mars is about finding a way of asserting ourselves. So if we are feeling a bit stuck, but we just cannot break through, don't worry. That moon trine Mars does show us a way through. And it is perhaps about our emotions. And it's also about not feeling that we have to use the direct approach. So moon square Pluto could be about having strong feelings, intense, transformative feelings. And then moon trine Mars shows us a way to express ourselves. Another aspect going on today is, and I must be very careful about pronunciation, I have talked about the aspect which is 36 degrees between two planets. That's a tenth of a circle. And in my previous videos, I pronounced this aspect decile, D-E-C-I-L-E. And one commenter kindly informed me that I had been systematically pronouncing it wrong. In fact, it should be pronounced decile. I don't know how it happened, but I suppose decile is a word I never use in my ordinary language except on these videos. I don't hear people use the word decile, so I go around in my happy ignorant bliss thinking it's pronounced decile, but actually it is pronounced a decile, and there is a decile between Mercury and Mars. Mercury and Mars as a pair is the principle of expressing oneself with a certain amount of force, even anger. And the decile is about the attempt to create a particular style. That's what some of us might be trying to do. We may really feel that we do have to express ourselves, and we have to express ourselves forcefully. We feel it's necessary, and so we make a special effort to be forceful in our words, but it's a little bit fake. We're perhaps trying a bit too hard. So if there's something you want to say, it's important to try to say it naturally. It may be contrived as you try to put the words together, but try somehow to make it a bit natural. And if you can't make it natural, maybe you should say nothing, because if someone just seems forceful for the sake of it in a fake kind of way, it doesn't have much of an impact. Now, one thing about Mercury, from a geocentric point of view, not a heliocentric point of view, but from a geocentric point of view, is slowing down. It's about to go retrograde. Doesn't go retrograde immediately, but it's getting there. So with Mercury slowing down, it may be that some of our thoughts are slowing down, some of our mental reactions are slowing down. It may be a time when we need to reconsider our plans, especially if we're thinking, towards the end of the week and into next week, because Mercury retrograde can cause quite a lot of havoc, and it can be about delays, communication issues. So that is a note for the future, but also, yes, remember, Mercury is slowing down. It's getting extra weak now, but it's in Pisces. Mercury doesn't work very well in Pisces. Sorry, it's not in Pisces, it's in Aries. Sorry about that. Mercury has actually, let me rephrase that. Mercury is not particularly weak because it's in Aries. It's a reasonably good place for Mercury to be in, especially as Mercury is quite close to the North Node. But as it slows down, it loses points. And of course, it will lose loads of points when it goes retrograde. And this retrograde motion of Mercury starts very soon. I think it's actually on Monday that Mercury goes retrograde. But yes, it is slowing down, and that is going to be weakening Mercury in quite a big way. So don't be surprised if things don't happen as quickly as they used to, and maybe our minds and our mental reactions are not going to be as fast as they used to be. This is a temporary situation, though. Remember, Mercury goes retrograde, it'll stay retrograde for 3 weeks, then it will go forward again. Finally, I wanted to look at the heliocentric position. So these are the positions of the planets from the perspective of the Sun. So we put Sun in the middle of the chart. So we see Earth here, and the Sun at 7 degrees 28, the Earth at 7 degrees 28 Libra is making a sesquiquadrate to Uranus. Earth sesquiquadrate Uranus. That could bring a certain amount of instability. I think that's very much there. Remember, this is quite an impersonal chart, the heliocentric chart. It's instability in the world, a feeling of general nervousness. And in fact, the Earth it's making the sesquiquadrate to Uranus, then it's moving on to a sesquiquadrate to Jupiter. So the Earth is then moving on to a sesquiquadrate with Jupiter. So the Earth is kind of moving on to the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. For some of us, this might be a time over the next couple of days where we want to be free, but it can also just be about things happening we weren't expecting, and in terms of the world, just events making life on the planet a little more unstable than usual. Another thing going on is that there's Mercury at 17 Leo, heliocentric Mercury, is on the Venus-Mars midpoint. You can see there's Venus, there's Mars, there's Venus. They are 14 degrees apart. So you put the midpoint between Mars and Venus is around 17 Aquarius. So Mercury is opposition the Venus-Mars midpoint. That is charismatic. It is about people trying to be charismatic, and it's also, I suppose, about sex, communications about sex, people talking about sex. After all, it's Venus-Mars. These are the two planets of relating to sex. Mars is about male sexuality. Venus is about female sexuality. You put Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint, and that is talking about sex. The world talking about sex. There's a certain preoccupation there, or more of a preoccupation than usual. So, again, see what's going on around the world, see what the newspapers are talking about, see whether that heliocentric picture actually fits the reality of the situation. Okay, that's the picture for today, and now I'm going to look at the 12 signs. But once I've reset this to the usual chart, the geocentric chart, and I am now going to give my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, March the 27th, 2024. Aries. The moon is changing sign. It's moving out of Libra and into Scorpio. And for you, I think this is quite a big change. It does make things, in a way, a bit slower, because the moon is moving into Scorpio. Scorpio is a sign that doesn't really fit with Aries. Although both planets, both Aries and Scorpio both signs, Aries and Scorpio, are ruled by Mars. So both Aries and Scorpio are signs that are fairly assertive, that like to be in control. Aries likes to be in control in a direct way. Scorpio likes to be in control in a more subtle, indirect, emotional way. This means that with Moon moving into Scorpio, you feel that your normal ways of asserting yourself are perhaps not working as well as they used to, and that you have to start using different techniques which may actually be quite alien. Having to listen to your feelings, perhaps having to be more manipulative than usual. And it's tough because it's quite difficult to get the balance right. You want to go storming ahead. You want to just do it your way. But if you just do it your way, you're unlikely to be very successful. Yet, the Moon in Scorpio does make a trine aspect to Mars in Pisces. So that is a trine in water signs. Mars is, of course, your ruler. This Moon trine Mars certainly allows you, Aries, to get your way. No doubt about that. But you do have to use a different strategy than you usually use. And perhaps it is a reminder that Mars is in Pisces. Mars is going to be in Pisces until the end of April. And overall, it is a time when direct action is unlikely to be successful, when you do have to take an indirect approach. You don't go storming ahead. Perhaps take a sideways attack. If one takes an aggressive approach to the attack, in the last place that anyone looks, and don't feel any great need to announce your intentions or to make threats. Yes, Aries, it's a bad time to make threats, because if you just make threats, people are not really going to take them seriously at best. At worst, you are giving people advance warning. No, if you're going to do something, just go and do it, but do it in a subtle way that no one notices. You don't have to discuss it. Just do it in a quiet way, and have a longer timescale than usual. Perhaps normally, if you're typical Aries, you want something done in 5 seconds. How about 5 days or 5 weeks? That might be a better timescale. But whatever the timescale you're used to, double it, triple it, quadruple it, take your time and listen to your feelings all the way. Because actually, your feelings are on quite good form. You have better contact with your emotions than usual with Mars in Pisces, and it's going to be there till the end of April. And so by listening to your feelings, you can start to understand the way forward. Now, some of the stuff you're picking up on today may be somewhat difficult, and this is not a reflection on you. This is not a reflection on what's happening in your life. It's just what you're becoming aware of. And firstly, Moon is in Scorpio. From an Aries perspective, Scorpio can be a sign which is about the general unpleasantness in society all around you. And there are other things going on which do make me think that you're especially aware of it. Perhaps we're talking about unethical behavior, criminal behavior, the lowest of the low in terms of human intentions and, yes, behaviour, and you're aware of it. You can see how awful people are and how awful the world is. Again, I'm not saying the world is awful. I'm just saying that right now you are aware of the awful aspects of the world. Now, don't take it too personally. It's just what you're aware of. You're more aware than usual. Just take a note of it and perhaps ask yourself what you can do to remedy the situation. But I really must emphasize it's not personal. It's not about you. It's about the world in which you are living. Taurus. Well, I suppose the big thing today is the fact that the moon is moving into Scorpio. And Scorpio is your opposite sign. So when you've got moon moving into Scorpio, you tend to put the emphasis on other people. You may not want to put the emphasis on other people, but you can't deny that there are people out there who just can't be avoided. And it's not just people, it's what is happening in the world around you. The focus has changed. The focus is not about you. The focus is about the other. It's therefore important that you consider how the other can have an impact on your life. And I think today it may occur to you that some people are really very stubborn. I mean, I know that Taurus, you can be quite stubborn yourself, but other people are also stubborn. Stubborn especially in an emotional sense. They have strong feelings. You know, people close to you have strong feelings. That's always been the case. But those feelings are going to be stronger than usual. And there may be an unwillingness for these people to discuss what's on their mind. And you might find that to be rather uncomfortable, especially as the moon is making a square to Pluto. People are really holding on to their inner feelings, thoughts, resentments, aggressions, and you have to stay with it. You mustn't overreact or get annoyed with someone because then you feel they're holding something back. Just accept the situation and give people time. In this light, the moon is not just making a square to Pluto, but it's also making a trine to Mars. And that trine between the moon and Mars is very connected with relationships and with other people, because Mars rules Scorpio. Scorpio is your opposite sign. So moon trine Mars is about people finally being able to express themselves. There is a way for people to let you know how they're feeling, and that might mean that pent-up feelings may eventually express themselves. It could be a display of anger, but I don't think it is going to be too destructive, because we're not talking about moon square Mars, we're talking about moon trine Mars, and that means perhaps, Taurus, that your job today is to facilitate people's self-expression. Just be there for them. Don't be pushy. Don't be judgmental. Have respect for the people that are important to you, and provide an environment where they can be themselves. And then you might find that this emotional deadlock starts to resolve itself, and in the end I think the day could end on quite a satisfactory note, though to an extent, that depends on your time zone. The moon, sure, it moves into Scorpio in the morning if you're in the Americas. If you're in Australia, New Zealand, the moon doesn't move into Scorpio until this evening. So if you are in East Asia, Australia, New Zealand, you might have to think about what I'm saying more about later in the day, even tomorrow. So it does depend to an extent on your time zone. But in a broad sense, give people space. Allow people to have strong feelings. And if you can feel those feelings, but you don't know what those feelings are, like a tense atmosphere, you have to go with it. You might say, you might be so tempted to say something to move things on quickly, but that's not the right approach. The moon in Scorpio is in a fixed sign, and you have to allow people to express themselves at their own pace, in their own way. Gemini. As I said in the introduction to this, Mercury is slowing down. Mercury is your ruler, and when I say that it's slowing down, what I mean is that from the Earth's perspective, it appears to be getting slower. Mercury normally moves from the Earth's perspective well over a degree a day. It can move over 2 degrees a day, but now it's moving. I think it's moving about half a degree a day. That's slow, and you have to accept that. Things are not going to happen as quickly as you might like, and this is because Mercury is about to go retrograde. It doesn't go retrograde until Monday. And traditionally, what we say when Mercury is retrograde is that, communications are up the creek, letters, we shouldn't be sending letters, we shouldn't be telling people important things. So what I might want to say on that is, well, if you're concerned about Mercury moving retrograde, could affect you particularly because Mercury is your ruler, then if you've got a message to deliver, then, well, maybe you should get it done now. Deliver the message before Mercury goes retrograde. Or maybe you should accept that it's a bit too late for sending important messages, and maybe you should wait until after Mercury has gone direct, which is going to be in, nearly 4 weeks' time. Also, with Mercury retrograde, I know that you've got a very fast mind. After all, you're a Gemini, but it might not be quite as fast as you think it is. So don't overestimate your quicksilver wit. It may fail you when you least expect it. That might mean then, Gemini, that you need a certain amount of modesty. And don't necessarily put yourself in positions where you need that quicksilver wit. Normally you may be able to argue your way out of the most difficult of situations, but today, but not just today, but in the run-up to Mercury going retrograde, your ability to argue may not be as good as it usually is. And instead, it might be better if you just get yourself together. I have got some criticisms, by the way, for my forecast, my videos. And what a couple of people have said is that I need to be more prepared. I'm a Gemini, and I'm going to send that back straight back. I'm not going to accept that criticism. I understand it, but I'm going to send that criticism right back to you because I'm a Gemini. It's important to be prepared. More important than usual. So I'm saying this to myself because I'm a Gemini, not just to you. We do have to be more prepared. I know that many Geminis don't like being prepared. I'm going to talk about Boris Johnson. later in this video. And he's a classic example of a Gemini that often isn't properly prepared. Or, okay, I know it's no longer so important because he's not British Prime Minister anymore. But he feels that he can sort of busk it, that he can just talk in generalities. He's a generalities kind of person, typical Gemini. And yeah, he's often unprepared. And in terms of sorting out the facts, reading his briefs, and that is what we have to be aware of. We have to be more prepared. And that's something we can focus on today. Let's take the positives for today. The positives are you can think about what needs to be done, what you need to know, what you need to learn, and you can sort it out. No problem. And I think you actually know what you need to do. It's tedious, really tedious. Geminis don't like being bored. I mean, Geminis will often complain about being bored. And having to do something boring, having to familiarize yourself with tedious facts, I mean, that is the last thing you want to do. But today, I think that's something you would be advised to do. Not just because it can protect you from things going wrong, but it can actually give you an advantage, especially as the moon is making a trine aspect to Mars. Mars, at the moment, in a Gemini horoscope, is in a very high-profile sign, Mars in Pisces. So if moon is trine Mars, that means that with preparation, you can have a dramatic influence. Even though Mercury is going retrograde, it will really be obvious that you know your facts if you have revised your facts. Obviously, if you haven't revised your facts, if you have forgotten to do the reading, forgotten to do the work, oh, well, then everyone's going to notice and you're going to be in trouble, or you could be in trouble. But if you're properly prepared, you can have a really big impact, and I think quite a fortunate impact. So, Gemini, it's up to you. You know what you have to do. You probably don't want to do it, but I think now would be a time when you should do it. It's not enough to be verbal. It's not enough to assert yourself verbally. You might think it is. After all, Mercury, your ruler, is decile Mars. It's not just that the moon is trine Mars today. Mercury is decile Mars. Mercury decile Mars is about style. And many Geminis are going to want to give the impression that they really know what they're talking about, that they can talk about things with great anger and vitality. But if you don't know your facts, you are going to really make a fool of yourself. So if you are planning on being verbally assertive, make sure you do the legwork first. That way, you can have a great impact. So, really, Gemini, it's up to you. Cancer. The moon is now moving into Scorpio. This is something of a two-edged sword. The moon is your ruler. So, moon moving into Scorpio is not so bad because Scorpio is a water sign. Cancer is a water sign. So when moon moves into Scorpio, you feel more comfortable with the world around you. Scorpio has a reputation for being a very emotional sign, and some people just find that kind of emotion somewhat threatening. But not you, Cancer. I mean, Cancers are emotional people, and when the moon is in Scorpio, you're comfortable with what's going on. Even if people are just behaving in a really obnoxious way, when they're hiding their feelings, they're playing games, you can see through it all. And so there's no threat there. When people hide their feelings, usually most people just can't deal with it because it just makes things complicated. But you, Cancer, you understand it. You can feel it. And at the same time, when the moon is going through Scorpio, you get a great sense of your own vitality. Yes, it might be a bit complicated, but you still feel that there are things you can do. Particularly now, the moon is trine Mars, and that does give you a lot of energy, and it does certainly allow you to assert yourself. And this trine between the moon and Mars is having a direct impact on your sign, on Cancer, because Cancer's a water sign. You've got moon in Scorpio, making a trine relationship to Cancer. You've got Mars in Pisces, again making a trine relationship to Cancer. So that really energizes you and puts you at, I think, an advantage compared to other people. A lot of other people are finding it difficult to adapt to the moon moving into Scorpio, but for you, it's not a problem, really. And you can actually use your feelings in a constructive way. Though, I should point out, and this is perhaps when I was talking about the moon being a Scorpio, being a two-edged sword, one side of that sword is, well, one edge of that sword is about the moon being in a water sign, in a sign that concords with your own sign, yet it is still moon in Scorpio. Your ruler, the moon, is in the sign of its fall. Indeed, it's in early Scorpio. And some of your feelings may be quite negative because the moon is in Scorpio, because the moon is in the sign of its fall. Not everything is going to work well, and you may still be holding things back. And some of your resentments may be very clear. Remembering that Cancerians do have resentments. It's said that Scorpios don't forget, and they're quite into revenge and bearing grudges. But to be honest, I think that's more the case for Cancer. Cancerians really don't forget. A grudge that happened decades ago is still like it happened yesterday. And one thing about Cancerians is that Cancerians can be very protective. So, for example, if you've got, I don't know, two children and brother and sister, two brothers, one of them is a Cancer and someone is nasty to their sibling, Cancer would get really upset. And decades later, when the sibling who has completely forgotten about it, has forgotten that they were, for example, being bullied at school, the Cancer will still remember. And if that bully is, I don't know, now 55 years old or whatever, Cancer will remember. And so, Cancer, ask yourself, is it really worth holding on to certain grudges? We're probably not talking about something that happened decades ago, but something perhaps that happened recently. Ask yourself, if you do have a grudge, is it worth continuing with the grudge? Perhaps someone behaved badly just for some trivial reason, and it's not a big deal, and it doesn't really say anything devastating about their personality. So in certain situations, Cancerians might be advised to let go. Leo, you're feeling that it may be time to take a little bit of a break. simply because the moon is moving into Scorpio. Leo is a fixed sign, and the moon is moving into Scorpio. That is another fixed sign. And so with the moon moving into Scorpio, you may be uncomfortable having a high-profile social life, for example. You may just feel that you can't really express yourself as much as you'd like. And I think you need to respect that. You don't have to be out there all the time. It really is unnecessary. And I understand that the sun is in Aries. So, the sun is your ruler. It's in Aries. It's still conjunct that Mercury-Venus midpoint that I was talking about yesterday. You are a creative person in a creative world, and while the sun is in Aries, you certainly want to take advantage of all the opportunities that are available. But still, in the very short term, it might be a good idea to take a step back. It's okay. You won't be missing anything. And Leo, it may be that there is work to be done at a more private level. The moon, after all, is making a trine to Mars. It's also making a square to Pluto, and we need to consider what that might mean. Moon square Pluto. Yes, you want to withdraw a bit. You're also aware that there are people out there who do have a big influence on you, and you may feel that you're part of some kind of power struggle. And that is another reason why you need to retreat into somewhere where you're comfortable. Because if you are involved in any form of power struggle, you want to be in a place where where your strength is at a maximum, and that may well be your motivation. But avoid the temptation of brooding. Moon in Scorpio is a place that can brood a lot. And Leo, for you, yes, you can brood. Being focused on one thing, sticking with this one thing, and Moon square Pluto doesn't help. And that Pluto may be suggestive of a particular relationship that is difficult. It's a relationship that has a subjective element in the sense that you might have an idea about what this relationship actually is about. That's not necessarily that's not necessarily the way it is. It may not be quite as complicated as you think it is, but you seem to feel that you may be involved in a complicated relationship with serious issues to deal with. But the moon is trine Mars, and I think that moon trine Mars is assertive, but any assertion on your part does have to be quite private. Just because you're taking a big initiative doesn't mean that anyone else needs to know about it. It can be quite private. You can be starting things, for example, relating to research or some new idea you want to get off the ground, and no one needs to know about it. It's not necessary. Indeed, I think it's a case that the less people know about it, the better. And that's another theme about today. I think secrets are going to be important. There are some things, yes, you'd like to tell people about them, but you also know that it is a situation where the less said is the better, and where the less said, the better. So yes, Leo, I think secrecy today could be very important. And another point to make, Leo, is that you may feel that you're involved in some kind of battle, that something is holding you back, and you can't free yourself from it in any normal way, that you can only free yourself through some dramatic, cathartic action, breaking things, cracking the concrete that's holding you back. That may be something that's happening. I think you don't want to exaggerate. You maybe need to first understand what is holding you back. Is it something within you, something psychological, or indeed is it something from the outside? And don't go for sort of exaggerated movements, feeling that you have to take sudden action to smash the concrete. Okay, it may be necessary, but I just don't think that approach is really going to work today. I think you have to be more subtle and use the energy of that moon trine Mars I was talking about, working on your own, in your own way, to create the kind of world that you want to live in. Virgo. As I said to Gemini, Mercury is slowing down. It's not anything that specifically happens today, but I think now would be a good opportunity to mention the fact that Mercury is slowing down, because it is going to go retrograde quite soon, and Mercury is your ruler. I think it's Monday that Mercury goes retrograde. So with Mercury slowing down, I think, Virgo, perhaps you need to slow down a little. If you thought you could do something in a day, maybe lengthen your time frame. Maybe it'll take a week. Might even take 4 weeks for some things, because Mercury is slowing down and then it goes retrograde and it doesn't go direct. Well, from now, for over 3 weeks, almost 4 weeks. So don't be in too much of a hurry. There may nonetheless be some important preparations to do today. Perhaps remembering that Mercury is slowing down, there's perhaps a window to deliver a message, and this window is now opening. This window may not be open for very long, may be open just for a few days. So if there's something important you're trying to say, perhaps an email you want to send, or a letter you want to send, or you want to tell someone something, then I would not leave it too long. If you leave it too long, you could miss your moment. Okay, maybe not permanently, but you might have to delay by nearly a month. So what is that message? How can you deliver it? It's the kind of message that is perhaps not easy to deliver, because you have to choose your words very carefully, and it does require a certain amount of sensitivity. But I do think that you are going to be able to deliver that message, provided you're not too obsessed about detail. Now, being obsessed about detail is a standard thing everyone says about Virgos. And like today, you've got Moon square Pluto. Moon square Pluto can be very obsessive, and in your case that Moon square Pluto could indeed be about obsessing about detail, wanting to get things absolutely right, and you spend so much time trying to get everything absolutely right that you miss the moment. So obsess for a bit, but don't obsess for too long. So the Moon, having made a square to Pluto, it makes a trine to Mars. And perhaps this goes back to what I was saying about messages. Moon trine Mars is a fortunate aspect. It's quite an assertive aspect, but it is fortunate. And from a Virgo perspective, it is about getting the message across. So if there's someone you need to communicate with, then that Moon trine Mars should enable you to make the connection. And with Moon moving through Scorpio, it's possible that you might have to make a short journey to deliver the message, or perhaps you need to meet someone face to face. That might be the best way of doing it. So a face-to-face meeting which requires a short journey might be something you need to consider, because that may be the absolute best way of being taken seriously. And indeed, today, you can make an impression. You can be the source of a surprise. Of course, no one likes surprises, particularly now when the moon is in the Veer combustor at the beginning of Scorpio. But you may be the person to deliver the surprises. You may be the source of a shock. And in certain cases, if you want to get something done, if you want people to take you seriously, you may have to deliver a surprise. That might be the best way. You do something, say something that no one was expecting, and for a second or two they're speechless, and that's your advantage. So use the energies of today. And going back to that trine between Moon in Scorpio and Mars in Pisces, it's about how you go about it. It's about Virgo being subtle, slowly and carefully creating a situation that puts themselves in the absolute strongest position. It requires a bit of thought, but I don't think that it's anything that you can't handle. Finally, from a relationship perspective, I wanted to just go back to the heliocentric picture. From a heliocentric perspective, Mercury is on the Venus-Mars midpoint. It's conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint. So you won't see this in the geocentric chart, but from a heliocentric chart, Mercury's opposition to Venus-Mars midpoint. And I think this heliocentric opposition does give you quite a lot of charisma and attractiveness. It makes you appealing. And this is really going to help you get your message across. And so that's another reason to think that now might be the time to make your move, because I think people will be favourably disposed towards you, particularly once they really get close to you, because right now you are an attractive personality. So Virgo, I would really suggest that you make the most of it. But as I said, it's just really important to be subtle. Listen to your feelings. That way you can work out what the best approach really is. Libra. There are a couple of things that are bothering you today. You just feel that you can't entirely express yourself because you're concerned about the outside reaction. How are people going to respond? And you might be worried by another person's emotional potential. Do consider that possibility. You know, you're trying to do the right thing. You are perhaps more sensitive than usual. And so as you go about your daily business, you're aware that people do have strong feelings. And so you're perhaps afraid about what the consequence might be if you get close to any one person. I think that that fear is probably quite healthy, especially now with the moon being in Scorpio. The moon is now out of Libra. I mean, it depends on your time zone. But whatever's happening, wherever you are, moon is certainly leaving Libra, moving into Scorpio. And as a result, things are getting a little more complicated. And you are aware of those complications. And I think that it is good that you have an awareness of these complications, and your job then is to make things simple as possible. So focus on what you know and what you understand. If something doesn't make sense to you, then steer clear of it. You don't need to have anything to do with it. You can let someone else worry about it, or you can leave it for another day. And by keeping things simple, I think you can make a useful impact. But Libra, it's not a dramatic day. You can't expect amazing success. That's, I don't think, is going to happen. You just have to take things, I don't know, 1 5-minute section at a time, and then you will be able to make slow progress. And don't forget the financial dimension. From a Libran perspective, Scorpio can be quite a financially orientated sign. And I think that you're going to be aware of financial issues that you're not particularly comfortable with, that you might even obsess about, and you might not want to talk about money because you're worried about what the other person is going to say. Maybe you're worried about being criticized. Perhaps you've made financial mistakes in the past and you don't want to own up to them. Perhaps you bought stuff that is a complete waste of money. You don't want to tell anyone what you've been doing. Well, the moon is making a trine to Mars. It's not just making a square to Pluto. Mars represents another person, and it may be there are certain financial issues which you're not mindful to discuss that perhaps you should be discussing. Just make it very clear about what you have done, what the situation is, and you might then actually get some useful feedback. So don't feel that from a financial point of view it's all down to you. There's nothing you can do to make the situation better, that there's no help out there, because that's not true. There are a couple of people out there who can give you very good advice. And so a bit of trust might be a good idea. Of course, I'm not suggesting you trust anyone with your money. In fact, that would be a really bad idea, to literally trust people with your money, because the moon is in Scorpio. Moon in Scorpio, if you were to give someone your credit card or your debit card or all the details of your all the money you've got, well, then you'd be in real trouble. I'm talking about just getting some general advice. That's all. Nothing too dramatic there. And that sounds a bit negative, but there is a positive side to today. And I think that today, once you can remove yourself from material and financial concerns, you can start to discover the transformative power of your many skills. Skills could be about music, could be about art, could be about business. Whatever that skill set is, whatever that thing is that makes you a really talented Libran, you can actually bring those skills out into the open and actually start to use them. So what is it? Have you forgotten something? Maybe you have felt, Libra, that you really knew how to do something well, and you have felt that the world has moved on, people don't care anymore. I suppose it's the internet, it's AI, people just aren't really interested. Well, that's your perception, but I don't actually think that perception is correct. And if you focus on what you are good at, or what you feel you used to be good at, there is some transformative energy going on which can really help you bring it out into the open. Now, when I say bring it out into the open, I don't mean necessarily bringing it out into the open in terms of other people, the world out there. Firstly, you have to bring it out into the open in terms of your own world, your own private world. Start to exercise, practice this ability, which perhaps has been very dormant. And then you'll be surprised, I think. And afterwards, you may come to the realization that actually what you thought was a wasted talent is actually an essential talent that is actually relevant for right now in 2024. Scorpio. The moon is moving into your sign. That's got to be good news. Even though the moon traditionally doesn't work very well in Scorpio. I mean, it's said that the moon is in its fall in Scorpio. But you're a Scorpio. We're talking about something that you understand. So suddenly, Scorpio, you're in a position where everything is making sense. It may almost feel like you've arrived. It's your world. Okay, your world is complicated, but Scorpio is a complicated sign, and you have complicated feelings, but your feelings and what's going on in the world and how you feel about the world, they're all coming together, especially as the moon in Scorpio is making a trine to Mars. So Mars is your ruler. The moon is making a trine to Mars. That puts you, I think, in a pretty strong position. You can get your way. You don't have to compromise. You don't have to be someone you're not. If there's someone you want to be, then you can be that person. In terms of what could actually get in your way, well, the only thing that comes to mind is maybe your home and your family. They may be a bit demanding, and you may find that you have to give them a lot of your energy and a lot of your time. It may not even be people, it just may literally be your home. If you spend too much time in a familiar place, actually your energies could get sapped. Perhaps if you're somewhere familiar, if you're in a very familiar environment, you can have an immediate impulse to make changes, to say, well, this isn't right, that isn't right, I need to fix this, I need to fix that, and before you know it, your day's gone. So there's a small warning there. Be careful in your own home, be careful in anywhere that you're familiar with, because it could just waste a lot of your time, even if there aren't family members around you. But if there are family members around, that could certainly make things more difficult. But if you can move beyond that, then I think you can really benefit from the fact that the moon is trine Mars. And moon trine Mars does give you a lot of energy, and it allows you to assert yourself in a way that is really completely constructive. Doing something you're good at and making things happen. Yeah, Scorpio, you can make things happen. And it doesn't really matter what anyone else thinks. It's just the way it is. And whatever your activities today, even if other people are involved, it's still, this is the way it is. You don't have to explain, you don't have to apologize. Do what is right for you, and it's right for everyone else. But maybe, Scorpio, you shouldn't try too hard to explain what you're doing. That is because there is a Mercury decile Mars. So Mercury is a planet of communication. It's 36 degrees off Mars. Mars is your ruler. And Mercury decile Mars is the struggle to communicate, particularly if you're a Scorpio. And it is a struggle. You're struggling to get the right words out. And the right words don't immediately come to you. And I would therefore ask you to consider that Mercury decile Mars is actually a problematic aspect. You're forcing things. You're forcing the explanations. Your explanations may not sound particularly credible. And you may get nervous and flustered the more you try to explain what you're doing. Which means, Scorpio, don't talk too much. If you talk too much, you could spoil your effect, which goes back to what I was saying. You decide what you want to do, and you just go and do it. If someone asks you why you're doing what you're doing, there's this Slovak expression. I think it's lebo medved. And lebo medved, I came across this expression in a checkout line in a grocery store. I think there was a woman in front of me, and she wanted to get some groceries using these coupons, these cut-out coupons. And I mean, not that I speak Slovak, but I kind of got a gist of what was going on. And she gave him these coupons, and the checkout assistant, he didn't want to accept the coupons, and she was saying why, and he just said lebo medved, which apparently that means something like because it's a bear. Medved being the Slovak for bear, because it's a bear, just the way it is. That's the way it is, and perhaps that's what you should say. Use that Slovak expression, lebo medved. Why lebo medved? It doesn't matter. You don't have to explain. And if you take that approach, then I think, Scorpio, it can be a great day. Why is it going to be a great day? Lebo medved. Sagittarius. The moon is now moving into Scorpio. And Scorpio, from a Sagittarian perspective, is quite low profile. It's a sign obviously just before Sagittarius. So when you've got the moon here, it's a time when Sagittarians would perhaps be advised not to feel that they really have to do anything, especially when you've got the moon in the Via Combusta, at the most difficult part of a Via Combusta. When the moon is at, around 3 Scorpio, at least from a New York perspective, at midday, moon will be at 3 Scorpio. Things can just happen if you put yourself out. If you're in a high-profile setting, you might quickly lose control of the situation, and that's not what you want. So a bit of caution on your part would be a very good idea. Your energies should be going downwards, I think, rather than upwards, going into your own sort of private concerns, rather than feeling that you need to have a load of publicity. No, you don't need publicity right now, however famous you are. And if you try to engage with people, you may find it really difficult to get the words out. People might misunderstand you, or you might use the wrong words, and the words you use might just cause a misunderstanding, and that could be a problem. Remembering that we've got Moon in Scorpio is making a square to Pluto in Aquarius from a Sagittarian perspective, Pluto is in Aquarius right now, which from a Sagittarian perspective, that is about how you get the message across. And it is a time, indeed, over the next few years, where Sagittarians will be working out how best to get that message across. But it's still in a formative stage, and it certainly feels in a formative stage today. So if you try to explain to people what's on your mind or what's important to you, I don't think you'll make a particularly good impression. On the other hand, if you throw your energy into your own private pursuits, the kind of things you don't need to talk about, your own world, it's yes, I know, it's a very un-Sagittarian day, but you can't have Sagittarian days every day. It's just got to be a day when when you get off the train, or you get off the carousel, the merry-go-round, whatever you call it, and just stop and pause. And I suppose you can be creative in your own way, but do you need to have engagement from other people? I don't think you do. Although I should say that there are some people who seem to be in the mood for a change. So consider what people are talking about if you have to deal with them. Because if you listen to what they're saying, you will realize that they're not happy with the current situation. It's not about you. It's not personal, I don't think. It's more about what's going on in the world. And I think it might be a good idea to just listen. You don't have to speak. You just have to listen. Listen to other people's concerns and anxieties, and listen particularly to their impatience. Don't be impatient yourself, but many people around you are impatient. And I may not relate to anything personal, even anything to do with your immediate community. Maybe it's just about the world at large. We need a change. And that is a sentiment that I think you might pick up on quite a lot. You don't have to comment on it. In fact, you probably shouldn't comment on it. Just observe it. And in some way, once you start to get an idea of what's bothering people, that might help you, because it will help you understand the world better. And once we move beyond the moon being in Scorpio, that may be able to inform your future actions and initiatives. Capricorn. Capricorn, it's a day when you might like to be sociable, gently sociable. After all, the moon is moving into Scorpio. But you have to consider who you're dealing with. Who are you being sociable with? Because some of the people around you are not on great form. They might think they're on great form, but when it comes down to it, they're not. And I think that is very much tied up with the fact that the moon is in Scorpio. The moon, after all, is ruler of Capricorn. Sorry, the moon is ruler of Cancer, which is the opposite sign to Capricorn. And in Scorpio, it's not well placed. And it may occur to you that some people who you thought were in good shape are actually just not in good shape at all. And you need to accept that, and you need to respond to the situation. And you have to ask yourself, can you help? I think that is an important thing for Capricorns to ask themselves, can you help? So if someone's got a problem, someone says they need help, what actually can you do? And it may well be the case, Capricorn, that actually there's nothing you can do. Just because someone asks for help doesn't mean you can help them. And it may be a case that if you try to help someone, you will not get very good feedback. you might in the end be resented. Or perhaps you'll do something wrong, or you won't do something wrong, but the other person will claim you've done something wrong. And so it might be a question today of, the road to hell being paved with good intentions. You have lots of good intentions. You want to make the world a better place. You want to help people. But actually, if you try and do it, nothing good comes of it. So Capricorn, I think you need to be aware of that. And if in doubt, probably don't hold back, or at least make an effort to understand the situation. And I think that is something you can do, especially with the moon making a trine to Mars. With that moon trine to Mars, that gives you an opportunity to really understand what people are on about. But first, you have to let them take action. Because by letting someone take action, you're given an opportunity to understand them. How can you tell if someone can be trusted? How can you tell if someone is the right person to help? You watch what they do, and people will have clear ideas about what they can do and what they can't do. And as soon as you see someone in action, you will know whether or not they can be trusted. And that is probably it. And there's probably nothing much more to say. So Capricorn, you might want to be careful. But you might also want to consider your own capacity for creating change. And your capacity for creating change is not really about other people. In a way, that's a kind of a bit of a distraction. There is something going on, maybe at a deeper level. And Capricorn, you're starting to become aware of your own incredible power. This is quite a high-level thing going on. It's not about your ordinary life. It's just becoming aware of forces that are bigger than yourself, and they're all starting to form, and you're picking it up. And you may feel today that, not just today, it's about the general period we're in, but I think it seems to be coming to the fore today. Maybe it's because Moon is in Scorpio, but maybe it's because Moon is in Scorpio square Pluto. If you stop thinking about other people and you think about what you have access to and what you can see, because you can see the world for what it is, and you can see that you have the capacity for totally turning things upside down and for delivering huge force. And by force, I'm not necessarily talking about something literal, but it is, well, force as in, I don't know, firing a rocket at someone, although it might sometimes feel like that. That transformative force, that you're starting to be given an idea about what you can do. And maybe this is about your dreams, what you're feeling when you're half awake, this idea that you can really make things happen. So you have to work out what that means, because I'm being quite vague, but everyone has their own unique road, their own way of making an impact. And the way that you can make an impact is starting to make itself very clear. And over the next few days, maybe even weeks, you have to work it all out and work out what needs to be done. Aquarius. I think, Aquarius, you're feeling quite ambitious. You feel that there are things you now understand which you maybe didn't understand before. And this may link up with your relationship to your own emotions. All things being equal, Aquarius, is not the most emotional sign. I mean, after all, Aquarius is an air sign. But today, I think you are quite tuned into your feelings. And you understand how you can make an impact. And I think that's because you're tuned in not just to your own feelings, but you're tuned into the feelings of the world at large, the people you have to deal with. And if you are involved in anything connected with business and work and career, that kind of thing, then I think you're going to be very effective. You don't have to be in a hurry about it. You just listen to your feelings, and then you know how to respond. And you are helped by two aspects. You're helped by a square between the Moon and Pluto and a trine between the Moon and Mars. Now, this square between the Moon and Pluto needs to be discussed. Pluto is now moving in Aquarius, as you know. I think at the end of January, Pluto moved into Aquarius. This is about your power. It's a time where Aquarians can be very powerful. It can be overwhelming too, but you have access to a lot of power, and over the next few years, you're going to be able to really put this power into action and make a big impact on the world in which you live. And today, the Moon makes a square to Pluto, and the Moon is in Scorpio. It's in a high-profile, career-orientated sector of your chart. So this Moon square Pluto, which for many people is actually going to be a bad aspect, a difficult aspect, for you is, I think, going to be quite fortunate, because you will have a great sense of your own power and what you can do. And if there is a struggle to get your way, to make things happen, it's a struggle that I think you're going to welcome. You will almost enjoy the struggle. And even if you don't enjoy the struggle, you'll know that it's just something that has to be done. And when the Moon has finished making its square to Pluto, the Moon moves on to a trine with Mars. And again, that Moon trine Mars for you is really constructive. You can make things happen in terms of career, if that's relevant, business, also in terms of money. You will know how to look after your own financial interests, and you'll be able to take action to improve your financial situation. Okay, if you miss a chance with Moon trine Mars, it is a fast-moving planet, it's not the end of the world, because Mars is in Pisces, a very finance-orientated sign from a Aquarian perspective, and Mars stays in Pisces until the end of April. And so overall, this is a time when you can really make things happen with money, and you can stand up for your own financial interests. And that's really something you should be doing. But today, ideally, this is what you should make sure you do. Or maybe it's going to be tomorrow if you're in Australia, New Zealand, East Asia. But so do that. And as soon as you say something, as soon as you make it clear that you want something done in a particular way, especially of a financial nature, then I think the world will listen to you, and the world will actually do things your way. Pisces. One of the main aspects today is a trine between the Moon and Mars. Now, Mars is moving through Pisces, your sign. So overall, Pisces, it's a time when you're strongly placed, when you can make things happen, when you can perhaps be more assertive than usual. And with the Moon making a trine to Mars, this gives you extra power. You can find new resources to help you achieve your aims. Now, these resources might well be your own feelings. Your feelings are completely accessible. After all, Moon trine Mars in water signs. Moon is in Scorpio. Scorpio is a water sign. Mars is in Pisces. Pisces is a water sign. Moon trine Mars definitely benefits you. You can use your feelings to make things happen. And so don't hold back and don't try too hard. There's no need to try to sort of plan things, work out the exact best strategy. Just go with the flow. Do what feels right, and don't be too sympathetic towards criticism or people telling you, oh, maybe you got it wrong. Do you really know what you're talking about? Because I think today you do know what you're talking about. And with a few words, you can make it clear to other people that you are an authority, that you have done the preparation, that you understand the rules, you understand the law, you understand the constraints, that this is not something that needs to be discussed because you've already done the preparation. I hope you have done the preparation. The suggestion is that you have done it. And even if you haven't done all the preparation, you seem to know on an emotional level what's right and what's wrong. And I think most importantly, you understand limits. You understand how far you can go. And I think you're helped by the fact that Saturn is moving through your sign. I mean, I know it's been moving through your sign for a long time, for over a year. But as Saturn's moved through your sign, it's now at, 13 Pisces, you've become more responsible and you've become more aware of the important things like rules, laws, limits, what you can do, what you can't do. And this is now all becoming clear with this Moon trine Mars aspect. But don't be close-minded. You may have 90% of the answers, but there are still a few things you don't quite understand. And now might be a good idea to fill the gap, because the knowledge is available. And that goes back to the fact that Moon is trine Mars. The Moon is in Scorpio. From a Pisces perspective, Scorpio is a very knowledge-based sign, and the knowledge is available. It may be that this knowledge doesn't necessarily come from watching videos or reading books. It's the knowledge that comes from just being still, just soaking it all up. The information is there. Maybe you were told the information years ago, decades ago, and you haven't quite linked it all together. But now it's all coming together. And you have the knowledge of the universe on your side. The universe is prepared to yield some of its secrets. And with those secrets, you can give yourself the confidence you need to be able to tell yourself you're doing the right thing. And overall, I think you should be able to move forward today with confidence. Those are the 12 signs, and I'm now going to look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So, as usual, I ask the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 22, Grace. It's all about surface appearances today. or at least the first part of the day, we have to consider how we appear to other people. And the implication is that we mustn't hide behind adornments. We mustn't try to make ourselves special. We mustn't take shortcuts. We mustn't make a special effort to look good. It's not important. In fact, if we try too hard to look good, if we try too hard to boost our ability, to boost ourselves, to talk our talents up, then I think that we're going to get a negative reaction. If we want to move forward today, we have to do it with an enormous amount of humility. And the symbolism the I Ching gives is it says that there's a temptation to move forward in a carriage. But we shouldn't be moving forward in a carriage. We should actually be moving forward on our 2 feet. So we might have access to the carriage, something that makes us look grand, but we don't need the carriage. We can walk forward on our own feet. And that way we are humble. And if we want to get things done, especially if people, organizations are concerned, the more humble we are, then the more likely it is that we're going to be successful. And this is especially the case if we're engaged with something where we feel we don't have all the answers, where we feel a bit hesitant. Maybe we even feel that we're something of a beginner, that we're just starting on a journey, and so we're not in a position to be in a carriage. We don't deserve to be in a carriage. A carriage would give the wrong impression. So humility is really going to be really important. And it seems that we're going to be able to carry it off. Through humility, we get people's attention. In other words, we get the opposite. It's the opposite of what we normally think. We're supposed to shout about our many talents to get people's attention. That's not going to work today. We have to keep quiet about all our supposed abilities. Let the other person work that out for themselves, or the other organization work it out for themselves. And then this hexagram, Grace, it transitions to hexagram 15. Now, I have got that wrong, so let me just, I'm going to have to edit that, I'm going to have to edit it right now. Sorry about that. Again, Geminis do need to be better prepared. I think that that's very important, but I am not going to be able to edit it because the video is going. But this number 47 should be 15, modesty. So this is the hexagram we are moving to, 15. And again, it's more of the same thing. It is about being modest. We don't have to shout about who we are. We don't have to pretend to be someone we're not. If we just be ourselves, then it's going to be a great day. But if we have airs and graces, then yes, there could be problems. Finally, I want to go back to the astrology, and I want to discuss the moon in Scorpio. The moon in Scorpio does have a very bad reputation. I've just talked about the via combusta. The moon, when it's in the first half of Scorpio, is considered to be really, really difficult. There we have it. Today, moon in Scorpio. And one wonders, is this really the case? Well, moon in Scorpio is in its fall, because the moon is exalted in The moon is exalted in Taurus, therefore it's fallen in Scorpio. So we might say, when we see a moon in Scorpio chart, we might say, well, this chart is really bad because the moon is in Scorpio. This is someone who finds it difficult to express their feelings. They might be brooding, they might be vengeful, and in terms of relationships, there could be problems because they can't express their feelings properly. And yes, we have this vindictiveness, and also it just could be generally unfortunate, people with moon in Scorpio. And I'm not saying any of this is true. I'm just saying that moon in Scorpio has a difficult reputation. And I want to consider a number of people who have the moon in Scorpio, to consider how this moon in Scorpio might be working out. Julian Assange has the moon in Scorpio. And I don't know a great deal about Julian Assange, but he certainly has a moon in Scorpio, 7 Scorpio. And in this case, the moon in Scorpio may be about passion, a strong sense of right or wrong, even if it's really quite. Sorry, let me do. I'm a bit messed up. There's Julian Assange's chart. Julian Assange. Yes, he's got the moon in Scorpio, and I was saying he might have a strong sense of right and wrong. And with his WikiLeaks, he seems to have felt an obligation to reveal certain facts about what governments are doing. And in the process, he has caused himself a lot of problems. I mean, he had all that time in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, and now he's facing deportation to the US. I'm not quite sure what's going on. Last I heard was that he was negotiating with the American authorities, that there may be some way in which he can, I don't know, have some sort of plea deal and can be released very soon. But clearly there is a sense of sacrifice with the moon in Scorpio that we shouldn't underestimate that sacrifice. It could be self-destructive. And interestingly, Julian Assange is often associated with Edward Snowden. So Edward Snowden was this American who, like Julian Assange, was aware of things that he wasn't comfortable with, and in the end he moved to Russia because to escape arrest for revealing information. And he clearly, like Julian Assange, has strong feelings about right and wrong and about the security state in which he was living, and he wanted to tell the world about it. And with Edward Snowden, you can see that his chart, he was born June the 21st, 1983. He has the moon in Scorpio as well. So that is moon in Scorpio, feeling something that is so important that you have to do something about it. And then we find that Chelsea Manning, who was associated with WikiLeaks, who went to she, of course it was originally a him, but he changed, I think, changed gender. Chelsea Manning has the moon in Scorpio. There we have it, moon in Scorpio conjunct Mars. So that's really interesting because Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, and Chelsea Manning, those three people really associated with each other in terms of revealing government information, all have moon in Scorpio, and three people who have suffered because of that need to tell the world about what is going on. So we have a link there. Scorpio is about secrecy, doing something in private, getting hold of secret information. Moon in Scorpio is also feeling that something is wrong. And perhaps this is Moon in Scorpio in its best possible light, feeling an obligation that something has to be done, even if it's highly damaging to themselves. And so there may be a sense of sacrifice here with Moon in Scorpio. And yes, all those three people had Moon in Scorpio. They were worried about secrecy. So we associate Moon in Scorpio with secretiveness and brooding and being brooding. But in these three cases, you had three people who were worried about secrecy, who felt that secrecy was not a good thing. Indeed, they felt it was such a bad thing, they were prepared to take enormous personal risks in order to reveal information. So that is Moon in Scorpio in its best possible light, the concept of sacrifice. Another example of a Moon in Scorpio sacrifice is Jan Palach. I've talked about Jan Palach quite recently. So Jan Palach was a student in the former Czechoslovakia who was really upset after the Soviet invasion well, it wasn't just the Soviet invasion, all these Warsaw Pact countries piled into Czechoslovakia in 1968 to smash the Prague Spring. And Jan Palach was so upset about it that he set himself on fire and died. I think he did this in Prague. And we can see that Jan Palach had the Moon in Scorpio, conjunct the South Node. So again, we see the concept of sacrifice, getting really upset about something. The way governments are working, it's the way one's personal freedoms are being infringed, and then going and doing something about it. And because Moon in Scorpio is the sacrificial nature of it, going one step further, effectively killing himself to get his message across. And I suppose with that South Node, I'm afraid I have to say that was the wrong thing for him to do. That's what I think. South Node is where we should be moving away from, but Moon conjunct South Node, there was a powerful pull there to do this self-destructive thing, and one's reminded of that image of the scorpion. I don't think it's actually true, but it was said that if you take a scorpion and you surround it in a ring of petrol, ring of gasoline, and you set fire to the gasoline, it will sting itself to death. That's a tradition. That's the story. And so there is that element of the Moon in Scorpio. Moon in Scorpio can also be nasty, can be quite vicious. And one of the most notorious figures in British criminal history is Myra Hindley. So Myra Hindley was born July the 23rd, 1942, and she hooked up with a man called Ian Brady, and they killed children. I think it was Ian Brady doing the killing. I don't really know about the details, but and so Myra Hindley helped him. They stopped children. I don't know the details, but she would be part of the team luring children to their deaths, and she had Moon in Scorpio. Now, I suspect that if she'd never met Ian Brady, she would have never have killed anyone. I'm pretty sure that would have been the case. But Moon in Scorpio is about destruction and killing. It can be. Maybe it's about the three faces of the moon. What's it? The three faces of the moon. I suppose you have the young woman. Is it the virgin and the mother, and the final one is the hag? Now, of course, she was in her 20s, so she's hardly the hag. But there is the image of here of the destroying mother, especially as she has a sun in Cancer. There it is. She has a sun in Cancer, moon in Scorpio. Very nice. But as it happened, she was a child killer. And she was perhaps picking up on something quite sort of mythical, spurred on by Ian Brady, her accomplice, or at least she was his accomplice. So this is a reminder that moon in Scorpio can be really nasty and has a capacity for viciousness, which is just connected with the fact perhaps that it's fallen, wants to destroy. Another person who had the moon in Scorpio, someone who I talked about pretty recently, was Magda Goebbels. So Magda Goebbels, she was the wife of Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister. And she, at the end of the war, the end of the Second World War, she had a chance to leave Berlin with her 4 children, but she didn't take that chance. And like Myra Hindley, she killed her children with the help of an SS doctor and her husband's approval. And there's her moon in Scorpio. Here, I think, we very much see moon in Scorpio like that scorpion surrounded in a circle of gasoline. Total self-destructiveness. She wasn't going to leave anything behind. In the face of the Russians surrounding Berlin, she was going to destroy everything. I suppose she was caught up in the ideology of Nazism, and she killed her children. That is that complete self-destructiveness of the moon in Scorpio. Although, unlike Jan Palach had the south node on the moon. Magda Goebbels had the north node on the moon. Does that mean it was the right thing for her to do, to kill her children? Of course not. Maybe we need to see the node in a different way. But yes, she really was the destroying mother. And that may be the worst aspect of the moon in Scorpio. Of course, she didn't, like Myra Hindley. Myra Hindley had the sun in Cancer. Magda Goebbels did not have the sun in Cancer. She had, obviously, the sun in Scorpio. But I think she is the destroying mother. And I think that new moon in Scorpio really does illustrate that. Another person with moon in Scorpio is Boris Johnson, Britain's former Prime Minister. And we get fixated with the Gemini here, don't we? That Boris Johnson has 4 personal planets in Gemini: Mars, Mercury, Sun, Venus in Gemini. Complete Gemini, happy Gemini, positive, enthusiastic. But we don't see the moon in Scorpio, do we? That moon in Scorpio represents a different side to Boris's personality, something which is clearly unpleasant. Now, I haven't lived in England for some time, so maybe you have a better idea than me about it, but there is a viciousness to Boris, and maybe that moon in Scorpio really found expression during the war in Ukraine, when Boris got involved and encouraged Ukraine to continue with this war. You had the Istanbul peace talks, and it seems that Boris, maybe other people, they came to Kiev and told them to keep going. Moon in Scorpio is a fixed sign. Want to keep going with this thing. And the reason that moon in Scorpio is so strong for Boris in terms of Kiev is when we relocate Boris's chart. So that means we ask ourselves, what would Boris's chart look like if he was born not in New York, but if, say, he was born in Kiev? So if we relocate Boris's chart to Kiev, so let's just relocate the chart to Kiev. I've done this before, but just if you haven't seen me do this before, it's almost a bit of a party trick, this. So let's relocate Boris's chart to Kiev. There's Boris's midheaven, 037 Scorpio. There is a moon at 0 Scorpio. So Boris's moon is if you set his chart for Kiev, is exactly on the midheaven. So Boris's moon is so about Ukraine. I mean, he really should be member of parliament. Should have been member of parliament for Kiev Central or whatever. That was his place, and from the moment he was born, he had an association with Ukraine, and it's almost like he had a destiny to have a big role in Ukraine's history and development. And I would argue that his destiny was, in many respects, to help destroy Ukraine. That his intervention, or the people he represented, April 2022, when he went to Kiev, when they were about to have peace, when the peace talks seemed to be going well, Boris was the representative of NATO and the West, and he allowed this war to continue. Perhaps he was a messenger boy, but his intervention, it would seem, led to the continuation of the war and arguably led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands. And most of them were Ukrainian. And so that is one way in which Moon in Scorpio might be working. But it probably says something else about Boris's life and how he treats people. That probably deep down, away from all that Gemini bluff, he's quite possibly fundamentally not a very nice person, and we should never forget that Moon in Scorpio. So that's Boris. Continuing on the theme of warfare, someone with Moon in Scorpio is Bomber Harris. When I was 17, I had a job for a few weeks in this factory, and there was this guy in the factory. This was 1979. He claimed to have been an SS officer during the Second World War, and he said to me that if the Germans had invaded England, Britain, it would have been fine. The only thing that would have happened would have been Churchill would have been hanged and Bomber Harris would have been hanged. That's what he said. And so Bomber Harris was the Air Force General, the Air Marshal, Air Chief Marshal, or whatever his rank was, who was responsible for the bombing of Germany. And he has the Moon in Scorpio. And to give you an idea about the Moon in Scorpio, it might be a good idea to just quote from him. He's famously said, talking about the Germans, he said, "They sowed the wind and now they are going to reap the whirlwind." And then he went on to say, "When the storm bursts over Germany, they will look back to the days of Lübeck and Rostock and Cologne as a man caught in the blasts of a hurricane will look back at the gentle zephyrs of last summer. It may take a year, it may take two, but for the Nazis, the writing is on the wall. Let them look out for themselves. The cure is in their own hands. There are a lot of people who say that bombing can never win a war. Well, my answer to that is that it has never been tried yet, and we shall see." So the vindictiveness of Britain's bombing campaign is perhaps demonstrated by Bomber Harris's Moon in Scorpio. Here is someone who pointed out that the Nazis had caused all this damage. They sowed the wind, and now they will reap the whirlwind. And here he is, Bomber Harris with his Moon in Scorpio. I don't know precisely what time he was born, but he will definitely have Moon in Scorpio, and quite possibly, notice he's got Moon conjunct Uranus in Scorpio. And so Moon conjunct Uranus, again, I don't know precisely how exact that moon is, It could be at 15 Scorpio, it could be at 0 Scorpio, but having moon conjunct Uranus in Scorpio, the imagery of revenge through bombing a country's cities is certainly would make sense. Of course, you could argue that it wasn't just about revenge. He believed that through bombing Germany's cities, he could win the war. But that concept of destruction, I think, can be quite a Moon in Scorpio thing, and you can see that he's got Moon conjunct the South Node in Scorpio. Now, the United States had its equivalent of bomber Harris, and that was Curtis LeMay. Curtis LeMay was the Air Force general who was responsible for the Tokyo fire bombings. And I believe there is a view that in Dr. Strangelove, one of the characters in Dr. Strangelove was modelled after Curtis LeMay. And I was thinking, when I looked at Bomber Harris's chart, I was thinking, well, I wonder if Curtis LeMay has Moon in Scorpio. So I looked at Curtis LeMay's chart, and here is Curtis LeMay. And Curtis LeMay indeed has the Moon in Scorpio. At 13 Scorpio for midday. I don't have his time of birth. So he was responsible for the Tokyo fire bombings. He was an enthusiastic supporter of bombing. During the Cold War, I think he was quite an advocate of dropping nuclear bombs on Russia. He was really into bombing, more so than Bomber Harris. And again, to get an idea of Curtis LeMay's view of the world, this is what Curtis LeMay said. He said, "There are no innocent civilians. It is their government, and you are fighting a people. You are not trying to fight an armed force anymore. So it doesn't bother me so much to be killing the so-called innocent bystanders." Again, that's Moon in Scorpio, and that really seems to illustrate the complete capacity for destruction of the Moon in Scorpio. Is there anyone else? Oh, well, if you're Canadian, you might be interested in the fact that Chrystia Freeland almost certainly has the Moon in Scorpio. She is the Deputy Prime Minister. Remember, she's the one with Ukrainian ancestry, who is an enthusiastic advocate of Canada's intervention in the Ukraine war. And yes, not surprising that she's got Ukrainian ancestry. Moon in Scorpio hangs on to the past, and in her case, she's hanging on to what was happening generations ago. You would have thought that you moved to Canada, you new life, new world, but no, you hang on, and there is that obsession with Ukraine, with her homeland. I don't know, wasn't it her grandfather was involved in some newspaper in Eastern Europe under Nazi-occupied Europe, and it was pretty anti-Semitic, this newspaper, and it had the support of the Nazis. So that's her kind of background. And Moon in Scorpio is perhaps about hanging on to that background. So at noon, I don't have a time of birth, but Moon was at 23 Scorpio. So there is a small possibility that the Moon was in Sagittarius when she was born. But she would have had to have been born very late in the evening for the Moon to be in Sagittarius. So I think it's very likely that Chrystia Freeland did have her Moon in Scorpio. I want to finish with one final chart, and I want to finish on a positive note, and I want to look at the horoscope of Langston Hughes, the poet. So he's the African-American poet who was famous during the 20s and 30s in the Harlem Renaissance. You can see that he, like Chrystia Freeland, his Moon is fairly late in Scorpio, so there is some possibility that Langston Hughes's Moon was in Sagittarius, but chances are it was in Scorpio. And so we shouldn't forget that the Moon can be a planet connected with communication. It is about emotional communication, and if he had, for example, the moon, you see, he might have moon square Mars. Again, we don't know precisely what time he was born, but moon square Mars can represent anger. And Langston Hughes was very angry about civil rights and the treatment of African Americans in the US in the 20s and 30s. He commented on sort of the lynchings in the South, and I think he was quite concerned about the passivity, as he saw it, of African Americans, and I think he blamed Christianity for that. That Christianity was not helpful. I think by the 30s he was pretty much a communist, and I think he was an atheist, and he thought that communism was the way forward, as other African Americans did, like Paul Robeson, who famously, he felt that he had more freedom in the Soviet Union than in America. So there is that anger, and that anger is shown in some of his poetry. And the moon is a communication planet, and so he has moon in Scorpio is the anger, square Mars in Aquarius. So that is another way in which moon in Scorpio can work, and it sort of harks back to Julian Assange and Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning, and I suppose Jan Palach, who set himself on fire because he was upset about what was going on. There is that anger and a feeling of that there is an injustice, and that injustice needs to be fought against, and you need to write about it. And Langston Hughes, I think, did suffer perhaps towards the end of his life, when perhaps his association with communism probably didn't help, but he was prepared to stand up for what he believed, and so that can be a positive feature of the moon in Scorpio. Okay, that's the moon in Scorpio. I hope that was of some interest. I've tried to be balanced with moon in Scorpio. It's not always a bad influence. There are examples, as with Magda Goebbels and Myra Hindley, where moon in Scorpio can be completely horrible. But there are other examples, like Langston Hughes, where it can be about having a great sense of injustice and feeling that one has to do something about it, and one is not just thinking about oneself. One is prepared to take risks and make sacrifices in order to speak about the injustices you perceive. Okay, well, thank you very much for listening. Hope you found that useful. If you enjoyed this video, I would be grateful if you were to click the like button. If you are not subscribed, I would be very happy if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.